All right, welcome everyone to another deep dive. Today we're going to be getting into something that's uh, pretty fundamental, I would say, to all of us, how
It's
we learn,
absolutely.
and maybe more importantly, how we can become better at it.
Yeah.
So think of this as a crash course, kind of a shortcut to getting up to speed on the core research behind effective learning.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
So, we've all had that feeling, when we're putting in the work, but we're not really seeing the progress
Right.
that we expect, or maybe we're intimidated even to start, like picking up a new skill
Right.
or learning something new because, well, how do we even approach that? And that's where understanding these cognitive strategies comes in, and that's exactly what our sources for today help us unpack.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that they're very, very basic questions and questions that we all ask ourselves, but
Hmm.
often we don't get really good answers to.
Yeah.
So things like, is there a need to teach these strategies explicitly?
Hmm.
Are they just things that kids are picking up uh, in their learning environments, or are they being explicitly taught in an effective way?
Yeah.
What are the key ingredients to effective strategy instruction?
Right.
What are the things that make it actually work? And how can we make sure that these skills generalize and are durable, that they last for a long period of time, and they can transfer to different situations?
Right.
So those are the questions that we're going to be dealing with today.
Yeah. Those are the questions that drive this research, and we are diving into a really comprehensive review from 1990 that serves as a really great foundational look at the research on this topic.
Yep.
We'll put links to all the sources out in the show notes if you want to check them out for yourself. But this review really explores these cognitive strategies, these specific mental tools that we can use that go beyond simply doing a task, but rather help us to actually improve how we do that task.
Yeah.
So these are things that might take conscious effort at first, but with practice can become, really second nature to us.
And they improve things like memory and
Yeah.
understanding and help us make sense of the world.
Absolutely. So, I think the first big thing to unpack here, the first big question that the research is asking is there even a need
Right.
to explicitly teach these strategies?
Yeah. Do we even have to worry about this?
Yeah. Are effective learning strategies already just a standard part of education? Do students graduate with these crucial tools in their mental toolkit?
Right, right. And some of the early research um, found some really surprising, well, they were surprising at the time anyway, results. So Gherkin did an extensive observation um, of reading comprehension instruction
Right.
across several grade levels. And one of the big takeaways was a real scarcity of explicit teaching of comprehension
Yeah.
strategies. So, thousands of minutes were spent observing teachers, and the focus just wasn't really on teaching kids how to understand what they were reading.
Right. And this wasn't even just isolated to reading, right?
Yeah, no, not at all.
Applebae's research took a similar look, deep dive into writing instruction in high schools.
Right.
And and again, observing for thousands of minutes
Thousands of minutes.
and a
Yeah.
very similar finding, a surprising lack of explicit instruction on the actual, process of good writing. It seemed like the focus was more on the mechanics or the content,
Right, right.
but not so much the strategy behind it.
The strategic thinking behind it, yeah.
Right. And this was the case across subject areas, right?
Yeah, and actually this was even the case when they looked at memory. So Motley and colleagues, they looked at how memory strategies
Right.
were taught in elementary school classrooms. And this was over an astounding amount of observation time, 9,000 minutes they spent.
Wow.
And while they did find that, there was some instruction that was related to memory, it tended to be pretty basic.
Hmm.
Not the really sophisticated techniques that research was indicating might be very beneficial for this age group.
Right.
So across the board, there was a gap in explicit strategy instruction.
Yeah. So the broad picture here is kind of a lack of explicit strategy teaching
Right.
in the classroom, but the review offers a really powerful counterpoint by looking at individual teachers who are highly effective.
Right.
So take Leinhardt's study of Mrs. Patrick, a second grade teacher who achieved remarkable success in teaching subtraction,
Mhm.
specifically the tricky concept of borrowing.
Yeah. Yeah, borrowing's a tough one.
Right. So it wasn't just about following steps. It was about her really focusing on her students understanding the why behind the borrowing process.
Right.
And her students showed impressive results. Not only did they grasp the concept better, but some were even able to transfer that understanding to more complex subtraction problems that they hadn't been directly taught,
Hmm.
like three-digit subtraction.
Hmm.
So this is like an aha moment, I feel like. This is, it can be done.
Yeah.
And it can lead to, that holy grail of learning, being able to apply knowledge in new situations.
And transfer is a really tough thing to get. It's really hard to get students to take what they've learned in one context and apply it in a different one.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they were able to do that, I think, speaks to the quality of the instruction.
Absolutely. And this raises a really important question. If some teachers are so clearly skilled
Yeah.
at teaching these really fundamental learning strategies, why isn't this approach more widespread?
Right.
The review points out that we need more research really focusing on exactly which strategies are being taught in different classrooms,
Mhm.
and whether teachers who effectively teach strategies in one subject area consistently apply those same principles across other subjects.
Mm.
So while, these broad observations are good, like the ones we just talked about, they might not be giving us the detailed picture.
Well-
We need to really understand what's going on in these effective classrooms.
So assuming, I guess, that we agree that there's room for improvement in how we teach learning strategies,
Yeah.
I think the next logical question becomes, well, what actually makes that instruction work?
Right.
What are the key ingredients?
Yeah. What are the things that make it effective? So the review highlights two main theoretical frameworks
Okay.
that researchers have drawn upon.
Okay.
One is Vygotsky's sociocultural theory, which emphasizes that learning is really a deeply social process, and that it happens through interaction and guidance.
Right.
And so a key example of this in action is reciprocal teaching. This was developed by Palingsar and Brown. Oh, yeah. So can you tell us a bit more about how that works?
Yeah, sure. So reciprocal teaching involves a teacher working with a small group of students, typically on a text.
Mhm.
And the key is that the roles are shared. So the teacher initially models 4 key strategies. These are summarizing, questioning, clarifying, and predicting. And then gradually, students take turns leading the discussion using those same strategies. So the teacher acts as a guide, providing support and feedback as needed.
Right.
But essentially, they're scaffolding the students' learning.
Yeah. So the students are gradually taking on more and more of the I guess the task of learning themselves.
Exactly.
And the other main perspective that the review highlights is more cognitive behavioral, which focuses on direct, explicit instruction of the mental processes involved in a task.
Right.
And the review points to the work of Roller and Duffy on teaching reading strategies as a prime example of this approach.
Yeah. And so they would focus on, how do you teach a student to decode?
Right.
How do you teach a student to segment words? How do you teach them to blend sounds together?
Right.
So it's very explicit instruction on the building blocks of reading.
Yeah. It's interesting that despite these different origins,
Yeah.
one really focusing on social interaction and the other focusing on the individual cognitive processes,
Right.
they both actually describe effective teaching in surprisingly similar ways.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
They both emphasize clear explanations. They both emphasize modeling.
Right.
They both emphasize guided practice and feedback.
Right. So there is this idea of direct explanation that is present in both.
Yeah.
And the review talks about the work of Winograd and Hare in this area. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so direct explanation emphasizes that the teacher really needs to explicitly explain the strategy.
Okay.
Break it down into steps,
Yeah.
provide lots of examples of how to use it,
Okay.
ask lots of questions to check for understanding,
Right.
provide lots of opportunities for practice,
Mm.
give immediate and specific feedback,
Right.
and then monitor progress continuously.
Yeah. So it's really this kind of a systematic approach,
It's very systematic, yeah.
Yeah. And it's fascinating how these principles kind of show up even outside of formal schooling, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like the review gives examples, like parents explicitly showing their preschoolers how to remember things.
Right.
Adults teaching children how to group objects together based on shared characteristics.
Right.
And even how really intricate skills like weaving are often taught through that gradual support, that scaffolding
Right.
from more experienced weavers to younger learners.
Right.
So, this idea of expert guidance really permeates all kinds of learning.
And even professional development.
Yeah.
You see it in Schoen's work, for example, on professional development in fields like architecture, music,
Right.
and counseling.
Yeah.
It's really about that expert providing a framework and support that allows the learner to gradually take on more and more responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a common theme that we've seen in a lot of the episodes that we've done.
Absolutely.
So I think it's good to see that come up again here. However, the review does include a really important point,
Yeah.
which is that while these methods seem effective based on observation and real-world examples, anecdotally they seem to work.
Yeah.
We still need more solid research
Yeah.
that directly links these approaches to consistently high levels of performance.
That's right.
And scaffolding in particular might be really difficult to implement effectively in a whole classroom setting.
Right.
Because it requires a lot of individual attention and tailoring from the teacher.
Right. It's very demanding on the teacher.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of moving on now to the learner themselves.
Right.
The review then asks, do students begin learning
Right.
completely without any strategies?
Yeah.
Are they starting from zero, or are they already coming in
Right.
with some kind of mental tools that they're using, even if they're not explicit?
So are they using strategies naturally?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the answer is that even very young children demonstrate surprisingly strategic behavior. So, for example, Delotion and her colleagues found that even 2-year-olds show simple strategies when they're trying to remember where a toy is hidden.
Oh, wow.
Like they'll continue to look at the hiding place, even though the toy's not there anymore.
Yeah.
And research in cognitive development, really in the 1980s, really focused on uncovering these early strategic behaviors in preschoolers.
Right. So
Yeah.
there is something that they're coming into it with.
Right. They're not just blank slates.
Right.
They're coming in with some kind of toolkit.
Yeah. And then as children grow older, these natural strategies tend to become more sophisticated, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the review mentions the development of rehearsal strategies, like
Yeah.
repeating information to yourself. In older children, when they're trying to learn a list, for example.
Right.
So it's not like they're coming into it, completely blank.
Right.
But there's still a lot of room for growth.
Right. Exactly. And researchers have used a variety of methods to study these naturally occurring strategies. These include, diaries kept by parents, documenting their children's learning behaviors, formal observations of children as they perform memory tasks in controlled settings,
Right.
and even inferences about their thinking processes based on patterns in their performance, like analyzing how long they pause before they recall information.
Interesting.
And then self-reports, where students describe the strategies they themselves use.
Okay, right.
That's been a very common research tool.
Now, self-reports, I feel like that's generated a lot of, debate
Oh, absolutely.
in the research world, right? There's this question of whether what people say they do really accurately reflects what they're actually doing.
Right. It's the classic problem of introspection, right?
Yeah.
Can we really know our own minds?
Right.
And the review touches on this, kind of the contrasting views of Erickson and Simon versus Nisbet and Wilson on this topic. So some researchers have raised concerns about the reliability of self-reports, suggesting that people might not always be aware of their own cognitive processes, or that they might, report what they think they should be doing,
Yeah.
rather than what they're actually doing.
Trying to give the answer that they think the researcher wants.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. However, the review also points to evidence that supports the validity of self-reports
Okay.
in certain situations.
Okay.
So, for example, Presley and his team found a link between students' reports of using elaborative strategies, like creating mental images or verbal connections,
Yeah.
and how well they actually learned vocabulary words.
Right.
So the fact that these self-reports actually predicted aspects of learning
Right.
that are believed to rely on elaboration added to their credibility in this context.
Right. So while, it's really important to be mindful of those limitations,
Yeah.
self-reports can still offer really valuable insights, especially when you're dealing with internal mental processes
Yeah.
that are really difficult to observe directly.
Right.
So the review then shifts to discussing more standardized ways of
Yeah.
assessing students' general approaches to learning.
Right. So how do they approach learning in general?
Yeah.
Not just a specific task,
Yeah.
but across tasks.
Right.
So they discuss self-report questionnaires like Schmeck's inventory of learning strategies.
Okay.
So these questionnaires ask students about their typical methods of studying and learning.
Right. Right.
But the review notes that there are some potential drawbacks.
Okay.
For example, different students might interpret the questions in different ways.
Right.
Some scales might focus more on the outcomes or the signs of effective learning rather than the specific strategies that are being used. So researchers are continuing to work on refining these tools to get a more direct measure of strategic thinking.
Right. So it's, always a work in progress.
Yeah.
And then there's also performance-based assessments. So
Well-
the review talks about Meltzer's surveys of problem solving and educational skills.
Yeah, so this is a very hands-on approach.
Yeah.
Involves watching students tackle actual academic tasks
Okay.
and then asking them about their thinking. So researchers are looking at, how students plan their approach, whether they monitor their own mistakes, if they can correct themselves.
Okay.
They also probe whether the students are aware of the strategies they're using
Right.
and whether they can explain their reasoning.
Right.
So, for example, in a task involving geometric patterns, students might have to categorize items based on different rules, and then they have to explain, why they made the choices that they made.
Right. So this is actually getting them to verbalize their thinking, which can be,
Okay.
really, really helpful in actually understanding what's going on there.
Absolutely.
So this combination of observing the actual performance
Well, yeah.
and then questioning the student about their thought process seems like a much more
Correct.
direct way of understanding, how students are actually using strategies.
Absolutely.
And then the review kind of emphasizes that while self-report measures are widely used, more rigorous testing of all these different methods
Yeah.
is needed
Yeah.
to really increase our confidence that they're accurately identifying students' general strategic tendencies.
Right. So we need to make sure that our tools are actually measuring what we think they're measuring.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've established here that there's often a need for better strategy instruction. We've looked at what effective teaching might look like.
Yeah.
We know that students aren't starting from zero when it comes to using strategies.
Right.
But now how do researchers actually go about developing and then figuring out if these new strategy teaching methods are actually effective?
Yeah.
So, are they actually working?
Yeah. So the review points out that effective interventions often arise from collaboration.
Okay.
I mean, researchers who understand learning theory
Right.
and educators who have practical experience in the classroom.
Right.
And this makes sense, right? Because the researchers can kind of bring the theory
Yeah.
and the research findings,
Yeah.
but the teachers can offer those invaluable insights
Yeah.
into what's feasible
Right.
and what challenges might arise when you're actually trying to implement a new strategy
Yeah.
in a real world setting. So the development of things like the University of Kansas Learning Strategies curriculum and the reciprocal teaching method
Right.
are highlighted as really successful examples of this partnership.
So this bridging between research and practice.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so before launching into formal controlled experiments, the review really highlights the usefulness of what might seem like a more preliminary step,
Right.
which is just, testing a new strategy and seeing if students perform better afterwards compared to before.
Right. So these are often called uncontrolled pre-test, post-test evaluation.
Right.
So while these types of studies don't definitively prove that the new strategy caused the improvement,
Right.
because there's no control group
Yeah.
to compare against,
Yeah.
um, they are incredibly valuable
Okay.
in those initial stages of development.
Okay. So we can at least get a sense of whether there's some promise there.
Right. Exactly. If students show improvement after they've received the instruction, it suggests that the strategy might have potential.
Right.
Conversely, if there's no improvement, that's a strong indication that either the strategy itself or the way it's being taught needs to be reevaluated.
Right. Right.
So this kind of initial testing really helps refine the intervention before investing in the more rigorous evaluation.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. So once a strategy intervention has kind of gone through this initial refinement,
Yeah.
what's the next crucial step
Right.
in determining whether it truly works?
Yeah. So that's where true experiments come in.
Okay.
And these are considered the gold standard in research.
Right.
Because they involve randomly assigning participants,
Okay.
which could be individual students
Right.
or entire classrooms,
Right.
to
Yeah.
different conditions.
Yeah.
And crucially, this
Mhm.
includes a control group that does not receive the strategy instruction being tested.
Right.
And this random assignment helps ensure that the groups are similar at the start.
Right.
So any differences in performance after the intervention can be more confidently attributed
Right.
to the strategy instruction itself.
Right. Right. So we're trying to control as many of the variables as possible.
Exactly. Yeah, you want to rule out as many alternative explanations as
Yes.
possible.
But setting up and running these kinds of classroom experiments, I imagine, comes with its own set of challenges, right?
Absolutely.
The review touches on some of these logistical hurdles.
Yeah.
You know, what are some of those things that make these studies so difficult?
Yeah. So you got to keep track of a large number of students.
Right.
You've got to ensure that the strategy is being taught in a consistent way across different teachers or
Yeah.
classrooms. You got to deal with practical issues like, student absences.
Right.
You've got to collect reliable data on how students are understanding and applying the strategy.
Right.
And then, studies that aim to follow students over longer periods of time
Right.
face additional challenges like students moving schools.
Right.
And then getting schools to participate in the first place can be very complex.
Yeah.
Due to the organizational demands
Right.
of implementing, new teaching methods
Mhm.
for whole groups.
Right. Right. So I mean, these are all the things that you and I, as researchers, we know very well
That's awesome.
how difficult these things are to actually get off the ground.
A lot of moving parts.
Yeah, absolutely. And even with a, seemingly straightforward setup, there can be debates about the best way to analyze the results, right? So the review talks about this units of analysis controversy, which is whether researchers should look at the average performance of entire classrooms,
Right.
or the scores of individual students.
Yeah.
And the review points out that statistically,
Yeah.
using classroom averages is often the more appropriate approach to make sure that the data points are independent, even though it might sometimes make it harder
Right.
to detect an effect.
Yeah, there are trade-offs.
Yes,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, you got to be really careful
Right.
about how you analyze the data.
Right. And what's also really critical when evaluating whether a strategy intervention is effective is ruling out other possible explanations for any positive results you might see.
Yeah.
So just because, students improve after receiving strategy instruction
Right.
doesn't automatically mean that the strategy itself is the reason.
Exactly.
So what are some of the other factors that could be at play here?
Well, it could be that, the teaching method is new
Right.
and exciting, so the kids are just more engaged.
Right.
The teachers might have higher expectations
Yeah.
for the students in the intervention group.
Okay.
What's known as the Pygmalion effect.
Right. Right.
Or even the students themselves might perform better simply because they know they're part of a study.
Mm.
And that's the Hawthorne effect.
Right. So how do researchers try to tease apart these different potential influences?
Yeah. So one important way is to include additional control groups
Oh,
in the study.
okay.
So for instance, instead of just having a group that receives the strategy instruction and a group that receives nothing,
Right.
you could have a third group
Okay.
that receives instruction in a different strategy
Okay.
that isn't expected to improve performance on the specific task being measured.
Right.
So if the group receiving the target strategy shows a greater improvement
Okay.
than both the no instruction group
Right.
and the group receiving the alternative strategy,
Mm.
it provides stronger evidence that the specific strategy itself is having an effect.
Okay.
So the review gives a good example of this with a follow-up study by Lysenchuk and colleagues on reciprocal teaching.
Okay.
They found that while reciprocal teaching improves students' performance on standardized reading comprehension tests, it didn't lead to better vocabulary scores.
Okay.
So this suggests that the comprehension gains weren't just due to, a general boost in motivation.